last days on earth, when he was old and about to be killed by Caesar, the Apostle Paul writes a very bold statement to his son Timothy. It is recorded in 2 Timothy chapter 4 verse 7, and I'll read, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Verse 8, finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. What is this that made Paul so confident and so settled that he felt so fulfilled at the end of his life? Welcome to this in-depth Bible reflections as we take a journey through this statement. My name is Brother Hilary Bramwel. I'm born again. Paul is a wonderful brother in the Bible. Some people love to say that he is the greatest apostle or the greatest man right next to Jesus. I don't want to go that direction because I think in the Bible, the language of who is greater than who and who is bigger than who and who is mightier than who is not really a biblical language. However, Paul is a very vital and crucial individual whose life can be a wonderful lesson to all of us, especially in the New Testament context. We are talking of a man who, when he's about to die, he's so fulfilled. He tells his son, I've done it. I have fought the fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I pray that when I grow up, when I grow old, I will have the boldness to repeat these words not just as a quotation, but as a reality in my own personal life. I also pray that that be your reality as you keep growing and as you keep living in this world. But what made him so fulfilled? We are talking of a man who fulfilled the Great Commission quite practically. You know, Jesus told them in the book of Acts, chapter 1, verse 8, that you will receive power when the Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, starting from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the rest of the world, or to the end of the world. Paul is one of the people who we can say actually fulfilled that commandment quite literally, because he preached not just in Jerusalem or its environs, Judea, Samaria, but he went all the way to Rome preaching the gospel. Preaching was something that had consumed this man so much that even when he was in chains, he kept on preaching. One day he was in chains, and there is this governor who was seated on the judgment seat. I think he's called Festus. And he allowed Paul a chance to defend himself. And when Paul was defending himself just as a criminal, Festus says, Paul, you almost convinced me to believe in your God. And Paul quickly takes that opportunity and he says, my Lord, it is my desire that not only you, but everybody in this courtroom, and you know, those days the courtroom were packed, it was a big hall. Everybody in this courtroom, in this hall, it is my desire that they all become like me, except for these chains. In other words, except for the fact that I'm arrested, I pray that everybody else will be like me. In his chains, he kept on preaching Jesus. In fact, in one of his letters, the letters, I think, to Philippians, if I'm not wrong, he, one of the people, or one of the group of people that greeted Philippians, you know, he told Philippians, brethren here, the people, the believers here greet you, including and especially those that are of the household of Caesar. And that tells you that Paul, when he was arrested and taken to Rome, he preached to the soldiers, because the household of Caesar meant the servants, the soldiers, the cooks, everybody that was serving in that household. Paul says they are now all born again, and they greet you. This guy was so, married to the ministry and to preaching the gospel, that one day while he was in chains, he heard a rumor that some people had taken his pulpit, and they were preaching out of malice. And when the report came to him, he says, I just don't care. I don't care whether they are preaching out of malice or for whatever reason. I am happy that at least the gospel is being preached. Whether it is being preached by a madman, whether it is being preached by a qualified theologian, all I want is the gospel to be preached. So this is a guy who fulfilled the Great Commission tremendously. When we speak about Paul, we are speaking about a man who was so much intimate with God and so much in tune with heaven that he traveled to the third heaven, whatever that means. I think only Paul can explain to us. When I go to heaven, I'll ask him. Because I really don't know what he meant. But I know there are a lot of guesses, and there are a lot of explanations to that. I've seen theologians trying to break down and tell us this is the first heaven, this is the second heaven, this is the third heaven. Okay, I believe one of those interpretations, but only Paul can really tell us what he meant when he says that he went to the third heaven. I think he told the Corinthians, I know of a man, whether in body or in flesh, I mean in spirit or in flesh, I don't know, but I know of a man that traveled to the third heaven and heard words that are inaudible, that cannot be comprehended by human minds. And he was, of course, referring to himself. When we talk of Paul, we are talking of a man whose handkerchiefs and aprons could heal the sick. If you were working with him, because he was a tent maker, if you were working with him and you managed to get his handkerchief and took it to your sick wife at home, throw that handkerchief on your wife and she will wake up and the fever will be gone. We are talking of a man who has written a third of the New Testament. And so Paul, according to me, is justified by all means to say, I have fought a good fight. I have kept the faith. I have finished the race. And I'm sure before me there is a crown that is awaiting me. This man had all the reasons to say that he had done it. And I pray in the name of the Lord that I and you may also do it. If you look at that text keenly, he says, I have fought the fight. I have kept the faith. I have finished the race. And there waits for me the crown. I'm reading from the New King James Version. I don't know how your version puts it, but my version repeats the article the faith, the fight, the race, the crown. And repeating of that article tells me that these things are not just for Paul, but there are things that are there. There is a fight that every believer must fight. And Paul says, I have fought it. There is a race. The race, the specific, the article there is a definite article. The race. That race exists not only for Paul, not only for Timothy, but also for me. There is a crown, definite, specific crown, that you and me must be crowned with. And so this is not just about Paul, and it is not just about Timothy. It is also about us, that we fight that fight. And we, run that race. And we keep that faith. And we are crowned with that crown. Who is this man? This man was born in a town called Tarsus. If you know your maps, we are talking about southeast of the present day Turkey. or if you may, northeast of the Mediterranean Sea. There is a town there, if you check it, there's a town there called Tarsus. That is where Paul was raised. He was raised as Saul. His name was Saul. I'm told that name in Hebrew is pronounced as Saul. And it is interesting. Tarsus was, I'm told, I'm not so sure, but I'm told that Tarsus had a university there, one of the biggest universities in the then known world, actually one of the top three universities of the day. And either Paul went to that university, or the university is just confirmation that Paul or Saul was raised in an environment that valued education so much. No wonder he was highly educated. He was a very educated, elite, sharp, polished young man. His name, Saul or Saul, is a very important name because, you know, those days they were not just giving children names the way we do today. You know, we see a name on Instagram and then we give our kid. You don't even know what it means. You know, the other day I was watching news and I discovered some people had already given themselves names, Corona. So somebody somewhere is Corona Omondi, and only to discover that Corona can mean something bad. But anyway, those days they were giving people names uh, prophetically, especially the Jews. And you know, the father of Saul, I think, or the mother, decided to give Saul that name, to name him after the first king of Israel, who happened to come from the same tribe that they were coming from. That is the tribe of Benjamin. You remember the first king of Israel, King Saul. And you know, once you have given your son a name after the first king of Israel, what follows is to raise him to become that which you want him to become. So that tells you that most likely Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul, was being raised to become a king. And he was given the best education and exposed to the correct content that befits an upcoming leader. And I think that really worked well and really helped them so much. Uh, Even though we might not be so sure whether he went to the University of Tarsus, but at least we are sure that he went to another university, maybe for a master's program, in quotes, under a very well known and a very famous professor called Gamaliel. Gamaliel, we read him in the book of Acts only once when there was a contest, I think in the Sanhedrin, and you know, they wanted to punish the church, the believers, like Peter and John, and the disciples, and you know, there were now many, and you know, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those guys wanted to punish the church, but the old man Gamaliel stopped them and told them, guys, if this thing is of God, even if you try punishing them, you will not silence them. If it is not of God, even if you leave them alone, it will not survive, it will not last. So let us not be so harsh to our fellow citizens. Let's just leave them do what they want to do. If it is of God, it will stay. If it is not of God, it won't stay. That was the wisdom of Professor Gamaliel. Professor Gamaliel was the teacher of Apostle Paul, who was by then referred to as Saul of Tarsus. So you see, this guy is coming in as a well-educated, well-exposed guy, you know, well-schooled, not only in the school of, you know, the normal schooling, but also in theology. Gamaliel was specifically a professor of theology, teaching people Judaism, the laws of Moses, and you know, all those things. You know, we had the 10 commandments, then we have the over 600 laws, then we have other regulations and cultures of the Jews, and Gamaliel was an expert, you know, informing the young generation about this stuff. And so Paul was loaded with this stuff from Gamaliel. The second influence that Paul had, which might seem obvious to you, but I want just to point it out for a reason, is that he was a Jew. Oh yes, being a Jew was quite something. Being a Jew was something that was going to help him in ministry, because being a Jew meant that, the Bible is actually your tradition. Being a Jew means that Abraham is your grandfather. These guys written in the Bible, they are in your lineage. And, that helped him quite a lot. And he was proud of it. He was proud to be a Jew. He was so proud. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. To the Philippians, in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, he writes them and he says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. I am of the tribe of the race of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Jew of Jews, or other translations will say a Hebrew of Hebrews. And then he says, and concerning the law, I was a Pharisee. Okay, and then he goes ahead and he says, and concerning zeal and passion, I was a persecutor of the church. That tells you, Jews, when you persecute the church, you are a big man. So he says, I was a persecutor of the church. And then he says, but all this stuff, I count them as loss that I may gain Christ. The third influence that Paul had in his life was that he also had or spoke another language, a foreign language called Greek. Why? Because Greek was the common language of the day. Like here in Kenya, Kiswahili, mahali popote unapoenda ukiongea Kiswahili utaeleweka. Hata na nyanya mzee ambaye haelewi lugha nyingine yoyote, at least Kiswahili ataelewa. So Paul could speak Greek, and many of his letters are written in that language, especially because they address some of these places that are not Jewish land. In fact, many of his letters were not addressed to the original Jewish land. Now, this guy, apart from speaking Greek, let me just run through, then I will explain why I'm giving you these details. Apart from speaking Greek, he was also a Roman citizen by birth. And that was big, because you see, in as much as he was a Jew, Rome was the reigning superpower. The Jews were under the Romans. Jews were not a sovereign nation. Israel was not a sovereign nation. Ever since Nebuchadnezzar, took them captives in the Babylonian captivity many decades and centuries ago, up to the days of Jesus, up to the days of Paul, Jews were under other governments, and in this time they were under the Romans. Okay, so the Jews are under the Romans, and being a Roman citizen meant that you had rights and privileges of a member of the superpower. Okay, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So this helped him quite a lot, and we see him especially in his ministry. His ministry had a lot of troubles. He was always arrested here and there, and his Roman citizenship helped him quite a lot, because the Jews can arrest you, but where will they take you? The courts belong to the Romans. So, and the Romans are not Jews, so Jews can oppose you because of your faith. Romans don't know Jesus. Okay, so and this kind of thing really helped him. One day he was arrested and he was beaten up without trial, and then when he was taken to the courtroom, there was a soldier standing next to him, and he turned to him and whispered and said, is it lawful for you to scourge a Roman citizen like me without trial? And everybody froze. And then he went to the judge, he said, guys, we are doing a big mistake. We are going to be against Caesar, and it will not be easy for us because this guy is actually a Roman citizen. And it helped him here and there. And so it was an advantage. I actually think and suspect some of the platforms that Paul got was because of that, because he could travel anywhere, and you know, all of a sudden he has a crowd. He enters a synagogue and he has a chance to preach, and so on and so forth. And you could wonder how he was managing that. And he got in prison, out of prison, here and there. I think his Roman citizenship really helped him a lot. Okay, so but then before I go on, let us pause and learn.